support from other Canadian diplomatic missions in Southeast Asia, and in partnership, of course, with the ASEAN SOGIE Caucus. And to formally welcome us this afternoon, may I call on Ryan Silverio, Regional Coordinator of the ASEAN SOGIE Caucus, to deliver his remarks. Ryan.
Thank you so much, Carlo. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Rainbow Parl. We thank the Government of Canada through the Embassy of Canada in the Philippines for collaborating with us in organizing this two-day event. Why are we doing the Rainbow Parl? We envision this as a safe, open, and constructive space for conversations on LGBTQI human rights, and more importantly, to cultivate synergies between LGBTQI plus advocates and allies from governments, the diplomatic community, and the private sector. Advancing LGBTQI rights can be tough. In ASEAN, we are confronting problematic and harmful discourses. First, that being LGBTQI is a Western construction and therefore contravenes local culture and values, which is inconsistent with domestic particularities, as many governments would always argue. Second, being LGBTQI is consistently viewed as a sin and therefore must be purged through criminal laws banning our existence or through conversion practices. Third, being LGBTQI is a deceit, a shame to the family and community, which positions many of us as targets of domestic violence, corporal punishment, and bullying. Life of being LGBTQI in Southeast Asia is consistently positioned being a sinner, a criminal, or a social deviant. We recognize the decades-long work by Southeast Asian activists in continuously seizing political, cultural, and economic spaces and transforming these to be inclusive. All of initiatives done by Southeast Asian LGBTQI advocates must continue and be supported fully. ASE proudly supported many of these initiatives and has been an active actor in human rights advocacy in our region. We've created spaces for activism and leadership. We've supported more than 60 local organizations, most of them unregistered, in doing rights claiming initiatives at the community levels. We've mainstreamed SOGIE and helped create inclusive civil society space by institutionalizing the principle of non-discrimination as one of the guiding principles of the ASEAN People's Forum. But then we're also confronting another problem, COVID-19, which impacted our work, which drastically pushed us to rethink our strategies and priorities, which amplify the vulnerabilities of many LGBTIQ organizations in terms of funding, in terms of human resource, in terms of volunteers who are also confronting health and well-being concerns. COVID-19 also highlighted the need for more support for well-being and health concerns of LGBTIQ activists. Confronting discourses in an uncertain environment, the pandemic, is our reality. As advocates, we are expected to think of ways forward. What will be our actions? What synergies can be cultivated? How can duty bearers and rights holders engage better to ensure that LGBTQI plus rights advancement remains an important agenda? I wish you a meaningful and insightful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for sharing our vision in this initiative. It is recognized that members of the LGBTQI plus community remain marginalized in many parts of the world. Although there have been notable strides over the years, including here in Southeast Asia, much work remains. Through this partnership with the ASEAN SOGIE Caucus, Canada continues its strong record of being a partner and ally in advocating for equitable and sustainable progress that includes improving the status of LGBTQI plus community members by ensuring visible representation of their issues in the policy arenas of governments and workplaces. To anchor and explain further Canada's support and advocacy for LGBTQI and SOGIE related rights based issues, we are happy to have with us this afternoon Canada's Ambassador to ASEAN, Ambassador Deidrah Kelly. Ambassador Kelly.
Good afternoon, everyone. As stated, my name is Deidrah Kelly, and I am Canada's ambassador to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And on behalf of our mission and that of the Embassy of Canada to the Philippines and all other missions in the ASEAN region, I am very happy to be here with you today. I had tried to find something a little bit more colorful to go along with the Rainbow Parl. I couldn't find a completely rainbow outfit, but at least I've got a bright purple shirt. So it adds a little bit of color to my day as well. I'm so sick of wearing black and being holed up in this apartment. For pronouns, I go by she or her. As I stated, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I'm not going to repeat the purpose of the initiative, as that was so ably shared by Carl, but I am happy to be here with you and share Canada's experience, because I do know that it's very different from what most of you experience. And I hope that through our example, it will inspire, but also, give the courage to those policymakers and lawmakers to admit where maybe mistakes have been made, as we're trying to do in Canada as well. So in terms of Canada's LGBTQI policy and legislation, as some of you may know, Canada has eliminated many laws that discriminate against the LGBTQI plus communities, beginning with the decriminalization of same-sex sexual activity between consenting adults in 1969. And in fact, at the time, it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was our prime minister at the time. He's the father of our current prime minister. And he's famous in Canada for saying there's no place in the state in the bedroom. There's no place for the state in the bedroom of the nations. And Canada has continued to build on that statement in terms of reforms that have slowly been implemented since 1969. We continue to review and revise laws and policies in the federal and local levels in order to better safeguard the human rights of Canadians in the LGBTQI plus communities. But we do acknowledge that there is work that remains to be done. And frankly, it's only in the last 2 decades where we have seen the human rights of LGBTQI people in countries around the world become the subject of serious foreign policy considerations. If I think of where we were even a decade ago in Canada, a generation ago, Canadians who followed these issues focused instead domestically, where we felt the ravages of AIDS and where we waged battles in our courts to recognize same-sex relationships. And it's important that we now have opportunities like this webinar to discuss these issues and how we can all work together. I think that opportunities like this bring into focus and into the mainstream agenda, and not have them relegated to the margins. And that is because this is an agenda that is not just exclusive to policymakers. And to that extent, it is so important that we continue raising awareness through initiatives like this one that come from civil society organizations who have the ground truth, who know the real struggles that people are facing, sometimes even when policy or legislation is supposed to be conducive to their rights, but reality shows that it is not. Another one of the very successful initiatives that were initiated by grassroots organizations was one that was launched in 2003 by a Canadian organization called the Fondation Emergence. And it conceived and organized the first ever National Day Against Homophobia. And this idea quickly became popular. And within a few years, an International Day Against Homophobia was observed in a number of countries annually on May 17th. And today, as most of you know, May 17th is known as the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, and is celebrated by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex persons and their allies in over 130 countries. That's something quite remarkable. Canada is proud to have been a contributor to the growth of this movement and also expanding our international activities to other fronts. But the work continues at home as well. And so our current Prime Minister, he reiterated the words and spirit of his father by stating that everyone deserves to live free of stigma, persecution, and discrimination, no matter who they are or whom they love. And our support in Canada of LGBTQI rights and issues is anchored on the pillar of the universality of human rights, that everyone's rights must be respected, and that in exercising your own human rights, it does not give you the ability to trump those of others, even if you don't agree with them. In terms of recent domestic reforms that have been undertaken in Canada, in 2017, so only a mere 3 years ago, 3 years and a bit, the Government of Canada passed legislation amending the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code in order to increase statutory protections for transgender and other gender diverse persons. And Canadian federal law now explicitly prohibits any discrimination, hate propaganda, or hate crime against Canadians that is based on their gender identity or expression. In November of the same year, 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologized for past federal legislation, policies, and practices that facilitated systemic discrimination against and persecution of Canadians based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. While sexual orientation is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that the Charter also protects Canadians against discrimination based on this ground. And perhaps even more importantly, all LGBTQI Canadians have the right to marry and to form a family. In 2005, Canada became the fourth country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage. And same-sex couples have access to the same benefits as heterosexual spouses. And LGBTQI individuals in Canada are treated equally to heterosexual persons with regard to adoption and have equal access to reproductive health assistance. At an international level, we attempt to make our voice heard on issues of LGBTQI rights, and we engage in multifaceted efforts to assist LGBTQI persons worldwide who are victims of violence and discrimination. We are a proud member and current co-chair with Chile of the Equal Rights Coalition. And this coalition, known as the ERC, is a network of states, currently including 39 different countries, that work in close collaboration with civil society in order to advance the rights of LGBTQI persons worldwide. And we continue, and based on what our Prime Minister's advisor on LGBTQI once said, when we have these discussions at the international level, it is important that we come from a place of humility, and we cannot expect other people into changing views and policies. So we tried not to come in forcing others to impose, but to use it as a platform for discussion and education, hoping that with this increased knowledge that governments will be motivated to seek change, or that populations will feel supported to seek the change from their governments. External pressures are easily dismissed, as alluded to by our opening speaker, with regard to the notion that homosexuality is a Western concept. And by pushing too hard, it can feed into the myth that LGBTI people are a foreign or Western concept, and can be rejected and cast off like colonialism. This is something that we hear often. And so I'd like to reassure you that Canada comes today to share its experiences, but most importantly, to learn from you what you are experiencing, what you are attempting to change, and what changes you would like to see and support you would like from Canada. I have been asked many times why Canada advocates for LGBTQI rights, especially abroad, where it is so far away from home. And I can tell you this: advocating for SOGIE legislation and LGBTQI protection fulfills our collective social responsibility to implement the universality of human rights, the affirmation that human rights principles of equality and non-discrimination should apply to all, to everyone. Second, that advocating for equality and non-discrimination in the workplace can have a direct effect on a company's bottom line. A study by the Boston Consulting Group in 2018 found that companies that implement diversity policies have almost 20% higher revenue due to innovation and the richness of diversity and voices that are brought to the table. So indeed, studies have found there is a correlation between the bottom line and enhancing equality and diversity programs in our offices. And finally, building on these shared values of diversity, equality, and inclusion, we think is essential in the changing global village. As our Minister of Women and Gender Equality has said, solutions to our most complex challenges will be developed and implemented by people of various backgrounds and experiences. Voices that haven't always been at the table can hold these solutions we have not yet thought about. Canada will be stronger when we include everybody. And indeed, not just Canada, but the world will be stronger and more stable when everyone is included. I wish you a good discussion today. Thank you very much for including me and welcoming me to make introductory remarks and to share with you some of Canada's recent experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Kelly. Thank you. It's interesting to see the comments in the chat box function while you're explaining Canada's role and Canada's rationale in advocating for equality and non-discrimination. I think several participants are now thinking about moving to Canada as per their comments in in the chat box. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kelly. Our keynote speaker this afternoon, Senator Risa Ontiveros, gave a prompt confirmation to our invitation when we sent the invitation to her 2 weeks ago. However, due to a personal emergency this morning, she cannot join us this afternoon. Instead, we invited her to join us next week as our first keynote speaker for our second webinar. So all of us would still hear from Senator Ontiveros next Wednesday. So we now would like to move on to our first topic, and to set the scene, we will hear from advocates and civil society representatives about the current human rights situation related to the LGBTQI plus communities in their respective countries. Each speaker is allotted 5 minutes for their presentation, and we will have a few minutes for Q&A after all the speakers have delivered their remarks. And the presentations will be in alphabetical order. So we start with Brunei Darussalam, and to speak for Brunei Darussalam, speaking from Brunei Darussalam, we have Serena and Nazura. Let me introduce our two joint speakers. Serena represented represented as the first transgender woman at the Regional Dialogue on LGBTQI Rights and Health in Asia and the Pacific in Thailand in 2015. It's a UN Development Program funded conference on human rights. Which marked her first step in transgender activism and not only motivated but empowered her to learn more and gain an in depth understanding on human rights and gender rights. This opened the glass doors to accept invitations and to participate in other conferences. Nazura Usop is a Bruneian visual artist who explores expressions through shapes and colorful rainbow interpretations, best described as an experimental abstract artist, and enjoys adding a unique perspective to her work. Her drawings are inspired from various organic cultural patterns, in which is also a metaphorical expression of growth, as well as inspirations from music and architecture. Not only is she passionate in the arts, she also has high interests in human rights issues, which she applies into her works. So we'd like to welcome Serena and Nazura.
Hi, everyone.
Hi everyone.
So, do you want to start first?
Um,
And then I'll.
okay. So let's basically just to touch base on what is happening here in Brunei. But before we begin, I am Serena. I'm a transgender woman, and my preferred pronouns is she, her. Um, and I have here my joint speaker.
Nazura, pronounced she, her, and the queer.
Okay. So to begin with, we wanted to touch base on the support and the scene of how it is, how the LGBT community here is being supported. In a sense, at this point, there isn't any local agencies that are supporting per se, but we have high like people from high commissions that are mostly foreign high commissions or foreign embassies that has been approaching us and providing safe spaces for us to have like a dialogue, just have conversation, and for us to share each other's experiences and how we can move forward together as a community, in a sense, for the support.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd like to share off about the impact that we have on the welfare and mental health of the community when the government in Brunei announced about the upholding the anti-LGBT laws. And despite pressure from the international community, it's still unclear to where it is at the moment, as the conversations are not being discussed as open as we expect them to be. But where Serena did mention, we do have a safe space with the foreign ambassador.
It's getting there.
It's
actually,
getting
in
there.
a
So
sense,
it's just started actually.
Yeah.
It just started. So just last year.
Yeah, a couple of years, just last year, there's more and more of the safe spaces that has been organized by this international foreign high commissions. So another thing that we can see that's actually moving forward in terms of the LGBTQ community here in Brunei is there are more and more spaces that's available for queer people and for LGBT community to come together and share whatever experiences that we've been going through, as opposed to before, where there was no conversations. No one would even want to open up the conversation among the friends, but now I see like we're moving towards that direction
Yeah.
of like access and safe spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. especially social media nowadays.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, and one of the things that also could also be a win for the community is that right now Brunei is actually organizing a free HIV testing, and that's anonymous at private clinics where we can just set an appointment. It used to be for the AIDS awareness back in December, November, and they've extended it in January. So I think this, in a way, is a promotion of like in terms of health entry to help support and be cautious about health and mental wellness for the community.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
So hopefully that answers you, Kenji, as well.
Ah, okay. Oh, for
Medical health.
transgender Brunei. We have a question here from Kenji. Is it easy for the transgender in Brunei to access the medical health care?
Yeah,
Um,
the private clinic do actually provide some medical health care.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of like general healthcare, there isn't any less so much of a challenge per se. However, access to hormone therapy is definitely restricted here, and it's risky when you want to decide to take on hormone therapy treatment. Sorry, excuse me. So in that sense, having access to hormones is very difficult and almost risky if we were to pursue in that sense. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah. Now, has any wins that you want to also share, perhaps, like in the direction that we're going? um
Actually, you covered everything. I guess
okay.
as opposed to, because there are questions that are we actually moving forwards than backwards? Like honestly, I guess we are moving forwards
Yeah.
more than
um
like what you mentioned before. Like we can't even have this conversation before as much as
Yeah, and I think the main of the, one main question that we have to us Brunei is the Sharia law, and where do we stand with the law that's implemented in Brunei? As we can see, Brunei is relatively safe for the LGBTQ community, and as with referring to the Sharia law implementation, um, both Naz and I, we can agree that we understand that it is there that acts as a law and as a guidance to to basically guide as the way of life of the society and the ideology of Brunei. However, if someone were to be an individual from the community were to be prosecuted under this law, um, there are a lot of stages
there are
and
a
there
lot.
are
Yeah.
a lot of tiers that you need to consider, and it's not an easy thing. Yeah, now,
Mm.
because there are a lot of things that you need to go through, and in Brunei, and knowing how small and closely knit the society is, prosecutions such as a death penalty and stoning is less likely or to never gonna happen. Not that I want to jinx it, but in that sense, it's not going
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, as like they mentioned that the Sharia law is there. It acts as a guidance
Yeah,
to what actually.
to I mean, sorry, the as guidance as a way of life of how the Muslim community is here in Brunei. Yes.
Okay. So if you have any more questions, maybe you can message privately
Oh
or
yeah.
something.
I think.
Yeah.
We will have time for questions after all the participants have delivered their presentations. But I think there's one last question before we move on to the next participant. Or sorry, to the next speaker. How is the landscape for organizing? I mean, I suppose this is about community organizing
Yeah.
for a more visible, uh, for more visible advocacy efforts. How is the Brunei landscape with regard to organizing these days?
It just started. It's starting. In terms of that, I guess it's more of a lot of private sectors doing it,
Yeah.
NGOs,
And yeah,
and with the
definitely.
support of mostly from the embassies, basically.
Yeah.
The government has not been involved.
Um, I think the main idea right now is we have to approach by piggybacking on certain NGOs and certain organizations for us to have a platform
Yeah.
For example, like the Brunei Darussalam AIDS Council provides the health entry points to reach out to the LGBT community in terms of the health awareness. So with the whole testing of with the whole having safe sex and all the educations of like health awareness, BDAC has been heavily involved, or I would say like discreetly injecting information to reach out to the community. Most of the time is us piggybacking on an
Yeah.
organization. Yeah, having to have our own main organization as an
It's
LGBT at this point is
yeah, it's scary. It's a challenge.
it's a
It's a
challenge,
challenge. It's a
definitely. Yeah.
challenge. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much
Thank you.
for giving us the platform to speak. But again, if there's any questions, we can
After.
we'll get to you after during the Q&A session.
Thank you, Serena and Nazura. Thank you. And just like what I said earlier, if we would have time after all the presentations, then we can read out a few of your questions later. Um, just a reminder for the attendees, you can ask your questions by writing them down on the chat box function of the webinar. So you can choose to send it directly to a speaker, or it could be asked to most or all of the speakers. And I think we will have around 10 to 15 minutes later to read out a few of these questions. Our next speaker is Ryan Corbari, representing Arus Pelangi from Indonesia. Ryan is a chairperson of Arus Pelangi, or Rainbow Flow in Indonesian. It is their vision is for a pluralist, multicultural society where even sexual minorities should have their rightful place. Ryan.
Okay, hello. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Ryan.
Yeah, okay. So, hi, my name is Ryan Corbari. You can call me Ryan. My pronouns is he, his, him, and I am a chairperson of Arus Planning. I would like to give a short presentations about the persecutions amongst LGBT community in Indonesia. So, so there is uh, before 2016, there is a LGBT issue in Indonesia is uh, not come up into the surface, so we can have a uh, various activities, and it's kind of moving forward. But since 2016, it's changing a bit. We call it a crackdown of LGBT community in Indonesia because uh, since 2016, there is a huge anti-LGBT movement raising up in Indonesia, and they kind of have an idea to the persecuted and want to discriminate LGBT people in Indonesia. In 2016, there is a uh, uh, lawsuit for the criminal codes to criminalize LGBT uh, community in Indonesia. We call it there is a judicial reviews for the draft of the criminal code uh, that we have a that they are uh, have they are having a same-sex face in the molestations articles to criminalize same-sex relationship and same-sex sexual activities, and the judicial reviews uh, it's held for a years. At and the end of the judicial review, there is a dissenting opinions that the constitution have to put that issues into the governments, and after that, the anti-LGBT movement is not uh, given up. So they have they propose a draft of the family resilience bill uh, that put LGBT into uh, rehabilitation and family interventions to cure LGBT people in Indonesia. And then since 2016 until now, the hate speech of LGBT, the hate speech of LGBT peoples getting raised day by day. For example, from the 2000 from December to just from 2017 until 2019, there is uh, 45 45 hate speech recorded. The preparator of the hate speech mostly are executive bodies, ministers, and local governments. What the impact for the hate speech? Uh, the it's we call it the license to kill for LGBT community because uh, the case of violations and persecutions of LGBT community escalated. We recorded from 2016, 19, and uh, from 2015 until 2016, there is a 200% raise of the number of the persecutions of LGBT community, and it's began to raise and stable in a high rate since 2016 until now. Uh, Persecution is included. The persecution is included intimidations, torture, and then a disbandment rates of the properties, saunas, and boarding house, something like that. And there is so many other persecution kind of persecution. And the preparator mainly are the law enforcers, policies, armies, and etc. And then it's a 47 cases, and the 38 cases is family. So until now, the persecution is still go still happens, and and then the discriminatory bill is still happened to be passed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. And again, if there are questions specifically addressed to Indonesia or about Indonesia, we'll have time later, or you can write them down on the chat box. Okay. Our next speaker is Anan Buafa from Proud to be Us, Laos. He is referred by the Huffington Post as the leader of Lao PDR's nascent LGBTQI movement. In 2012, he founded Proud to be Us, the nation's first civil society network promoting equal rights for people with sexual and gender diversity communities. As president and founder, he was instrumental in organizing the first Pride event in Laos. Anand was honored with the Asian Pink Awards in Singapore in 2014 and praised for his work in combating HIV and initiated the LGBT rights movement in his country. His organization was ranked in the top 9 world LGBT change heroes by The Guardian in 2016. And in 2019, he was selected as one of the Grand Marshals of the Montreal Pride, along with Montreal Pride, along with Steve Cruz of Star Trek and Monica Helms, the creator of the transgender flag. Anan, Anan, you're still on mute. So if you could unmute. Thank you.
Sorry. Sabadi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor to be one of the panelists here with such inspiring fellow leaders. And thanks to the Canadian Embassy in Manila and Ambassador Kelly and everyone. Um, I'm the founder of Proud to be Us Laos, known as the first, one of the first LGBTI civil society movement in the Lao PDR. So we kind of organized the first unofficial pride in the Lao PDR. We want to educate Lao society and also our government that being LGBTI is not a Western import, but it's human reality. So it is our statement that we want to advocate for acceptance. So I want to give you a brief overview about LGBTI situation in Laos. Fortunately, the same-sex activity is legal in La PDR. We don't have the law to, the colonial law that prohibits same-sex activities. However, it's still a lot to do because if you know about our country, we are one of the remaining conservative countries in terms of political status. That means that the idea of being LGBTI is viewed as a Western influence. So we need to work hard to prove that being LGBT it's a natural thing, it's human reality. So that's our movement started in 2012, and our approach is very in accordance to the local context. We working with government partner is paramount for us. We think that government partners is a key um, partners to advocate for positive change and to increase understandings and acceptance. And in 2020, we received the first two recommendations from Iceland and Malta. So this is a great news for the community. Iceland said something like adopt comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation that addresses direct and indirect discrimination and encompasses all the prohibited grounds of discrimination, including sexual orientation and gender identity. And Malta said continue taking steps to improve the rights of LGBTI persons, particularly by identifying their needs, considering involving LGBTI representatives in the decision-making processes. And our government, Lao PDR, responds to the UPR that we are not yet ready to accept recommendation number 46, which is from Iceland. From our views, we think that it makes sense for Lao to say that because um, there are not much efforts made by the community themselves. In Lao PDR, we only have a few organizations working on LGBT rights advocacy. So there's lack of data, lack of evidences, lack of so many essential fundamental data. So when our government said we are not yet ready, that means that, okay, this time is not yet ready, but maybe in the next cycle, the next 5 years, maybe um, we don't know, maybe they change their mind. So that means that community here have to work hand in hand with governments and hand in hand with the fellow CSO in the country as well. Of course, with the great lesson learned um, from ASEAN, and I'm very happy that to learn from you all. So we try to take notes, what are the possibilities and the great lesson learned from you all to um, apply here in Laos. And the successes in Laos is that LGBTI community was involved in drafting the national policy on youth development 2019 to 2030 by with the invitation from Lao Youth Union, which is equivalent to Ministry of Youth Affairs. So LGBTI was invited to have a in the national discussion. So this is a good step for Laos. And Idaho has been organized organizing since 2015. And Canada has played an important role in helping us to organize such a wonderful IDAHOT since 2018. The charter fair here, even the ambassador. We don't have the ambassador here in Laos, but in Bangkok, Thailand, only the charter fair. And ambassador also flew here to Laos to open the remarks and help us mark a very meaningful IDAHOT. And we also conducted the first ever research on being LGBTI at work. This one was supported by the government of Canada through the Canada Fund for Local Initiative. So this research was in partnership with the Faculty of Law and Political Science National University. So this is a very, very meaningful and a very a step forward to open the door of for LGBTI community, because normally the government partners are quite reluctant to touch base on this topic. And we secure their participation and coordination collaboration from the government partner, which is wonderful. So thank you to Canada for your support. However, having said that, of course, challenges, there are challenges involved. The first one, I think LGBTI is not widely discussed in the official agenda of the government, only the subject of HIV/AIDS prevention. We understand that HIV prevention is important for LGBT's health and lifestyle, but there are more issues surrounding them. So we wish to see more discussions, but there is a good sign already from our government. But in the future, we try to have more discussion with them. And of course, LGBTI is still viewed as a Western influence, especially when there are Western embassies involved. I think that is one of the challenging that community have to defend this idea to our leaders that being LGBTI is a human reality. It's not like Western country asks us to be gay. I think being gay and lesbian, transgender is natural. Nobody asks us to be, or even we watch Lady Gaga on YouTube doesn't make us gay or doesn't make us straight, you know. So this is something we want to work on. And not many NGOs and CSO working on LGBTI issues in the Lao PDR. I can name like 3 nationwide and all in Vientiane capital. And we have 18 provinces, 17 provinces, but only 3 in the capital city. So you can imagine that we need more. We need not just, you know, like one person have to vocalize the voices, but many have to join the force. So that's it for my presentation.
All right. Thank you, Anand. There's just one quick question before we move on to the next speaker. There's a quick question there. Is the research published? The research that you mentioned?
Yes, it's published in Lao and English.
Yeah, so maybe we can work together for you to be able to send it to participants who are interested to receive a copy of this research.
Yeah,
Any
with
links,
pleasure.
links that you can share. Thank
Sure,
you.
sure. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Anand.
Thank you.
All right. Our next speaker is Tilaga Sulathire. And correct me, Tilaga, if I pronounce that incorrectly. She is from Justice for Sisters in Malaysia. Tilaga is a community organizer and researcher, and Tilaga's work largely focuses on gender, sexuality, LGBTIQ+, human rights, and social justice. Um, They're a founding member of several LGBTIQ plus campaigns and initiatives, including Justice for Sisters and Queer Lapis. Tilaga is a member as well of Sexuality Merdeka. Tilaga, over to you.
Well done. Those were like really great pronunciations. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. In my attempt to stick to the 5 minutes time limit, I'm just going to get right into it. But I must say, this feels like a beauty pageant that I want to be part of. So thanks so much again for having me. So, in short, in a nutshell, I guess the human rights situation of LGBTIQ person in Malaysia continues to regress, right? And this session today is pretty timely, as only last week I think the Deputy Minister of Religious Affairs shared some proposed amendments under the Sharia Criminal Offences Act enactment to further criminalize LGBT people. And this proposed amendments include increasing punishment against LGBT people, criminalizing LGBT expressions on social media, criminalizing trans people based on their identities. At the moment, there are already laws that criminalize trans people, but these amendments are intended to make it easier to arrest transgender people, right? So this is extremely worrying, and I guess we've in the last few weeks we've seen a lot of statements and support from civil society organizations and the NHRI as well. So just to go back to that point, in fact, based on our monitoring of parliament hearings in Malaysia, increasing punishment and regulation of social media visibility and use social media visibility of LGBT people and the use of social media in general were running themes in the parliament. So the fact that this is happening now, which is connected to the political situation that Malaysia is in at the moment, is not surprising, but also frustrating, right? Because we are continuously seeing this, the scapegoating of LGBT people in Malaysia. So just in looking at the situation in Malaysia, I would like to. Oh my God, I only have 3 minutes left. Okay, in looking at the situation in Malaysia, I would like to focus on three issues. So first is the criminalization and non-recognition of LGBT people, and this will be covered later by the next session. So there are various laws under which LGBT people are criminalized, the federal laws, state Sharia laws, and there are also fatwas, which are religious edicts, right? I would also like to note that over the last few years, we have seen an increased prosecution of LGBT people under laws. Just please stay on the first slide, please. We've seen increase of prosecution of LGBT people under these laws. And in many cases, LGBT people who are prosecuted, have been caned for and imprisoned for attempt of sex against the order of nature, liwat, which is sexual relation between men, or musahaka, sexual relation between women. So the punishment for these law under these prosecutions have been quite serious, right, and amount to torture. Well, it is torture. Well, we've also been seeing a shift in terms of trends of laws against trans people in recent years. We've seen that trans people are charged under different laws, right, for insulting religion, for not performing Friday prayers, and for encouraging vice. So the prosecution is not necessarily just limited to the direct laws that criminalize LGBT people. Together with this, we also see state policies and positions that, in Malaysia, the state promotes rehabilitation of LGBTIQ persons, and they adopt a rescue and rehabilitate LGBTQ persons approach. And this rescue can be through arrest, and a lot of times people don't see that arresting and rehabilitating LGBT people as a form of violence, and I think that is deeply troubling as well. And together with that, we see harmful narratives and social attitudes, and this, as Ryan pointed out earlier, this includes religious narratives, sinners, deviant, etc. How LGBT people are HIV spreaders, and then also promotion of gender ideology, where we see the binary of of sex and gender, and the conflation of sex and gender as well. Another thing that I would like to highlight is the visibility and self-expression of LGBT people in Malaysia is also often misconstrued as promotion of lifestyle instead of us just expressing and exercising our freedom of expression. So as a result of all of this, there's been many, impacts. Next slide, please. And these impacts include, limited access, restricted access to services, opportunities, justice, among other things, right? I would like to, highlight a few key impacts. One is in terms of prevalence of HIV and health burden, right? So the country progress report on HIV/AIDS to 2019 projects that queer men and MSM will become the main key population in Malaysia to be affected by HIV in 2030. So this is actually a big, huge impact, right, in terms of health burden, not just on the LGBT person, but also on the state. The second thing is we are also, due to this restrictive environment, we are also seeing increase of migration and asylum seeking by LGBT persons in Malaysia in other countries. For example, between 2017 and 2018, over 50% of the people who sought, visa protection visa in Australia were reportedly Malaysian. And one of the four reasons that they cited for seeking protection visa was SOGIE. So the third thing that I want to highlight is also because of the intense discrimination that we face, especially trans people in terms of job discrimination. So we also see that LGBT people are in very precarious economic situation and have and overrepresented in terms of the bottom 40, and also face higher likelihood in terms of falling into poverty. So I think this is a big, macro impact that we are seeing, right? Connected to that, I just want to say, agreeing with other speakers in terms of the burden on mental health issues, right? Next slide, please. So there are a few key things that I would like to highlight before that I end my presentation. I guess like one of the things that is central in Malaysia is the issue of religion, right? In addressing criminalization or any other rehabilitation or conversion therapy and any other thing. So I think it is really important for us to really look at the intersection between criminalization and freedom of religion. And with, with in the context of criminalization as well, it is really, really difficult for a LGBT person to be queer and Muslim, to be queer and Christian, to be queer and atheist, or whatever else that they are. So I think it is really important for us to also, you know, um, sort of unpack these cis heteropatriarchal, religious narratives, so that LGBT people are better able to practice their religion, right? Also, I think it's also important maybe to look at, as I said earlier, to look at violence again. As I said earlier, the proposed amendments and the rehabilitation are not seen as a form of violence against LGBT people. Even the caning of LGBT people are not seen as a form of violence, because it is seen as a form of deterrence. So I think there is a need maybe to also for us to look at how we understand violence and how do we communicate that. And also lastly, it's also important to maybe for us collectively to look at homophobia, transphobia, and its connections to populism, democracy, and all of these things. Yeah, so I think I'm out of time. I shall stop here.
All right. Thank you, Telada, for that really excellent, condensed, a lot of ideas and information in that 7-minute presentation. Thank you. Thank you for that. We now move on to Lam Yatton, representing Colors Rainbow in Myanmar. Lam Yatton is one of the well-known LGBTQ rights advocates that openly challenge prejudices and discriminatory practices in Myanmar, demanding equality and acceptance of LGBTQ persons in Myanmar society. He is the deputy director at Colors Rainbow and working together with the country's ministries and parliamentarians to recognize gender identities and legal reform to protect the human rights of LGBTQ people. Lamyat Tun.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me for on this event, and I'm really honored to share my our experience on the legal reform with all the participants. Next slide. So we regarding the parliamentary engagement, we have, since you might already know or might not, we have the section penal code section 377, which criminalizes homosexual in the country. So we started engaging with the parliamentarians in 2015 uh, with the aim of decriminalization of homosexuality. So we started doing formal and informal meetings with the parliamentarians. Most of the parliamentarians we met or were already our friends who once become women activists, human rights activists, and the human rights activists mostly, and the human rights lawyers. So we could manage to talk to them, uh, formal and informal settings and different meetings. And we also established friendship with all the most of the member of parliaments in the parliament at the upper house and lower house as well. And also we organize parliament visit for the LGBTQ community by inviting influential trans people who are makeup artists, uh, art director, creative directors, or beautification who can really influence in their own community. So we invited them for the parliament visits, and they make a very good, very big news that they are visiting the parliament as a citizen, as a transgender woman, as a transgender man, as a LGBT community in Myanmar. So it really increased the visibility of the community. And also we organize exposure visits for the member of parliaments to other countries. For instance, we visited Germany, we visited Denmark, especially the country that uh, uh, LGBTI community can freely exercise their citizen rights. So they have those approaches are very effective for the Myanmar community. And so we started in 2015. We started the engagement in 2015, and the 2020 very recent in our last meeting with the parliamentarians. And we have three committees in the parliament, which are bill committees at upper and lower houses, and justice and legal affairs committees. We met with the chairperson and the vice chair and secretary of those committees, and they all agree for the decriminalization. So we are really looking forward to the next 5 year with this new government, which we just elected in 2020 on November 8th. So the new parliament is getting into the parliament next month. So we are excited. Next slide. Next slide, please. So while we are talking to the, not this one, previous one, while we are talking to the parliamentarians, we also conducted a research to see the perspective and attitudes towards LGBT people in Myanmar by the general society. So we interviewed 154 people throughout the country in September and October, and we have the results. Next slide, please. So we found out that 75% of the Myanmar population has LGBT friends or someone who is LGBT. And most of them are friends, neighbors, and the rest celebrity, relative, and college. And they 81% of the participants, respondent agrees that uh, LGBTIQ people deserve equal treatment and it should be legal. LGBT community should be legally recognized. So that's what they think. And this is a very high percentage of the percentage of the acceptance, which we did not really expect that high level. So we are really happy to see the results. Next slide, please. And so we are doing now, we call it Pink Challenge. Also, we called a Love is Not a Crime campaign, which is a 2-year campaign led by Colors Rainbow and Proud and LGBT Rights Network. So the campaign is going on for 2 years. We started 2020 last year in February during Yangon Pride, and we are now already 1 year time, and we are doing it until next year, February, until Yangon Pride next year, 2022 February. So this is 2 years campaign, and a lot of people are aware of this legal reform for the LGBT community and the and equal protection and legal protection for LGBT community. So the I would say the public opinion towards LGBT is very positive in the country, and the support from the parliament and the parliamentarians are also very uh, positive. So, like I said, I'm very looking forward to the next 5 year time with the new government, and we hope that some something really big will happen in 5 years. Thanks for listening, and I'm welcome to any question and answer after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamyat. Thank you. And it's very nice to have that, hope and promise, vision of what to expect after 5 years. And good luck and all the best in that campaign. All right. We now move on to Vince Liban, Pantay, Philippines. Vince is a human rights advocate fighting for democracy, gender equality, and youth empowerment, among others. With experience in student leadership, lobbying, and community organizing, he currently works as the national convener of the Philippine Anti-Discrimination Alliance of Youth Leaders, or PANTAY, a national network of young Filipinos campaigning for the passage of the SOGIE Equality Bill, or the Anti-Discrimination Bill in the Philippine Congress. Vince Liban.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you for inviting Pantay to give a brief presentation of the LGBTIQ plus situation here in the Philippines. I'm Vince, and my pronouns are he, him, his. Next slide, please. Yes, next slide. The Philippines has always been globally perceived as one of the countries, especially in Southeast Asia, to be considered relatively more accepting of LGBTQI plus people, as supported by the most recent 2019 global survey by the Pew Research Center. However, comparing it to the 2013 global divide on homosexuality, it's actually provoking to think that it retained exactly the same numbers. 73% of adult Filipinos agree that homosexuality should be accepted by society. That's 7 out of 10 Filipinos. In spite of this, only 24% of Filipinos, next slide please, reside in areas where they can be protected from discrimination on the basis of SOGI. This includes our most recent success from the city of Manila and their anti-discrimination ordinance protecting almost 14 million people. Next slide. Apart from the aggravating circumstances that the COVID-19 pandemic has created for millions of Filipinos, including LGBTQI plus individuals in education, employment, in accessing physical and mental health and well-being services, among others, here are three key points that I believe are faced by the LGBTQI plus community here in the Philippines. The first one is that human rights and democracy are demonized by the government. Civil liberties are under attack with the shutting down of journalists and television networks, and now the premier educational institution is being threatened as well. When spaces for freedom and democracy are under attack, campaigns for human rights, including LGBTQ plus rights, are very difficult to thrive. The second one is that there have been incidents where LGBTQI plus Filipinos have faced differential, discriminatory, and dehumanizing treatments during the lockdowns. There have been several reports. For example, LGBTQI plus minors caught outside curfew have been made to perform lewd acts while on videotape by their own local officials. Trans and gender non-conforming individuals in southern Philippines were punished by local officials by having to cut their hair. Some LGBTQI plus individuals have reported being harassed online and were accused of spreading HIV and the COVID-19. The murder of trans women Jennifer Laude was also pardoned last year by our very own president, adding injury to the wounds of existing violence against trans people. And more recently, three queer Filipinos have been kidnapped and murdered. The third one, while local anti discrimination ordinances are passed, there are still distressing gaps on national legislation that demand to be filled. A national law for anti-discrimination continue to struggle in Congress because of opposition from faith-based groups that even hold leadership positions in Congress. And also, there is inaction by the president. Um, there remains no marriage equality here in the Philippines, no gender recognition law, nor anti-hate crime law here in the country. But we are hopeful. We're very fortunate to be joined by one of our equality champs in Congress. One of them, Representative Geraldine Roman, is also here in this webinar. These are indeed difficult times for marginalized communities here in the Philippines, but hope keeps us alive and will keep us fighting. We empathize, of course, with our siblings from other Southeast Asian countries that continue to struggle as well. But we are glad to show our solidarity amidst these very challenging times. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Vince. Thank you for that presentation about the status here in the Philippines. Our next speaker is Jean Chong from Sayoni, Singapore. Jean has been an LGBTQ activist for more than 20 years. She's currently the executive director of Sayoni, a feminist queer women's organization based in Singapore that organizes, does research, and advocates on LGBT rights since 2006. She was the first female vice chairperson of a gay Christian support network, Safe Haven, and became their first female vice president in 2000. Subsequently, she was a founding member of an inclusive church, Free Community Church, and served as their first chairperson in 2004. Looking to expand her horizons in helping others, she went on to be a part of a core team of People Like Us in Singapore from 2005 onwards. Regionally, Jean is a chairperson of the Board of Trustees of the ASEAN SOGIE Caucus. Very pleased to welcome you here, Jean.
Hi, can you hear me right? So can I go to my slide, please? So obviously you already know I'm from Singapore. Things are sizzling in Singapore. There are a few things happening this year. This is also our UPR year. So in Singapore, I think one of the things that we are known for is that we have a sodomy law, section 377A. A number of the ASEAN countries also have this. So in 2014, we launched our first challenge on this law, but we failed. And the second time we launched it was in 2018 after the repeal of the 377 in the Indian courts. So in this week on Monday, we just had our apex court hearing, which we heard positive things coming out from it. So we're hoping to hear the judgment within the next couple of months. But despite this law, the government promises that they will not enforce it. Our findings have been that this 377A law not only impact gay men, but it cascades and inform policy making that affects all LGBT persons. Next slide, please. And not only that, our Attorney General has come out to say that the government's discretion on Section 377A does not curb their ability to use the law if they want to. So essentially, they're saying we give no guarantee. We only say we might not use the law. Next slide, please. So what are some of the things that is happening on the ground? So very often when I talk about Singapore, sometimes even human rights commissioners and activists will say, oh, there's no violence against you guys. Things are great. That's because a lot of times we use a development framework to look at human rights. And when you look at Singapore, it's pretty developed, but does it mean there are human rights? I think as Asians, especially Southeast Asians, we know this is not true. Development doesn't mean that you get human rights. So my organization has done documentation on the violence and discrimination of LGBTQ persons. I'm not going to read through all of them, but these are some of the things that are happening on the ground and happening all the time, including serious crimes like corrective or punitive rape, or violence at home, which is the major theme in our report. Next slide, please. So some of us earlier presenters talked a little bit about COVID, but I think in 2020 and this year, one of the major things that is happening on the ground for us is on COVID. Singapore's population, about half are my immigrants or foreigners from elsewhere. That gives us not. Can you go back? That gave us all kinds of challenges. So we did a quick survey, and you could see that during this COVID period until today, that the main thing for us is around mental health, and about 1 in 5 LGBT persons talk about violence at home during this COVID period, and obviously economic fallout. Next slide, please. So another thing that is happening, which is a big thing for us, as I mentioned earlier, is that UPR is happening for us this year. So my organization has done 3 reports, but one of the report that we've done is around it's a transgender focused UPR report, where we collaborated with a transgender group and along with APTN, and this is the first time where we try to highlight the nuances and complexity of how discrimination and violence is being faced by a transgender person. So I think the areas that are really serious is around domestic violence and the public policing, and also in schools. So we've documented students where the Ministry of Education has intervened in their medical treatment, leaving the schools to decide if the student can proceed with the HRT. And not only that, the school also there's a lot of gender policing happening, and they often force the transgender or gender non-conforming student to choose between access to education versus denying their own gender identity. So some of them are not allowed to go to school unless they conform to the rules. So again, this year on 15 January, a student came out and said this is what's happening to her. The first time a student was willing to come out and talk about it. So we documented and released a timeline to show how the violations were happening for the entire year. It was 365 days to this student. Next slide, please. And then the Ministry of Education went on to deny it, but used the wrong pronoun, obviously adding fuel to the fire. And just yesterday, a bunch of students went in front of the Ministry of Education to protest against what the Ministry of Education is doing to LGBT students. I know that 5% looks like nothing to many countries, but in Singapore, even a 1-person protest is illegal. So this is very brave. 3 of them have been arrested. So this is where we are at now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you for that presentation on Singapore. We now move on to Thailand. Wadao Chumaporn. Chumaporn is a core member of Togetherness for Equality and Action and Feminists Liberation Front. She is a writer, and her works have been published on economic history of politics and society of Thailand, and she has reported on the performance and establishment of the national human rights institutions in Asia. Her project focuses on the rights and awareness of lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex, non-binary, and queer community. She works with women and LBTN activists to engage with the ASEAN and UN mechanism. In 2018, she was the CSO representative to participate in the Universal Periodic Review sessions of Thailand. And now she is the spokesperson of the Commoners Party Thailand. Chumaporn. Wadao Chumaporn. Over to you.
สวัสดีค่ะ Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, you can call me Wat Dao or Dao. Next slide, please. Um, okay, the thing that we achieved in 2019 and 2020, I would like to share with you the situation in Thailand for three cases. Next, please. The first, I raised, oh, okay. Sorry. The thing that is happened in Thailand for official Thammasat University allowed transgender students to dress according to their gender. I think this is the first time in for the university in Thailand that mentioned to allow the transgender people can dress the clothes for their gender. But the thing that I would like to highlight because of they didn't mention only for the uniform, but they mentioned for all activity of a student. For the example, classroom taking on the exam, undergoing to the training, contact with the university officer, and especially attending ceremonies and include the graduation. Uh, for the Thailand, if you receive the ceremonies with the royal family, sometimes they ask the student to wear the uniform fit with their gender birth, but this is the first big step for the Thammasat University, even though Thammasat students received the ceremony with our kings. And I would like to focus more for this law. They also mention about if the staff in Thammasat University do anything is for the bullying or discriminating and for the transgender student, its meaning will be regarded as a violation of discipline. Next, please. Okay, and the second, in 2019, we can include the sexual diversity in the school curricula. We find more than 10 years, and right now the modification to the health and physical education curricula covering sexual diversity. The picture that show the bad curriculum mention about LGBT issue. They mention about the bad transgender. They mention about if the student did not fit on the gender normative male and female, they might get something. This is bad, but right now they delete all the text of the bad content in the textbook. Next, please. And the challenges that we face. Yeah, please. Next, please. Many people ask about how about the marriage equality in Thailand. I think some of you might heard about we have a direction of the how to protect the LGBT family in Thailand. The first we call civil partnership bill. The cabinet endorsed a bill to allow the partnership registration as a same-sex marriage reunion. But for my group and my position, we didn't agree on the civil partnership bills. We also agree with the marriage equality, and the Move Forward Party also put uh, the amendment, the marriage equality to amendment the section 1448 on the civil and commercial code to allow anyone to be the legally wed to regarding and gender and concept of the all gender can get the marriage. Just only delete the term word of male and women to replace to the all people can get the marriage. And I think Thanyawat will present to you in the next section. Next, please. And after the Move Forward Party proposed the amendment, the marriage equality, I would like to highlight the thing that we get from the Thai society. After the parliament the public hearing on the parliament website, we can collect the data as more than 1 million uh, uh, web, website visitor and more than 50,000 comments and give the comments about the amendment, the law. And I think the interesting thing is 80% are the female based on the gender identity. Based on identity card or sex of birth, and more than 25 are youth under 20 years old, and more than 20,000 people from 20 to 30 years old engage with the public hearing. Next slide, please. And most of them, when we look at the career path, more than 35,000 comments from the student. And after that, we look why for the public hearing in the parliament website have a lot of the positive comment from the youth. I would like to share about the Thai political situation. Right now, if you see on the news or the media, you will see the LGBTIQN community join the Thai protest with the political party. We run a lot of the parade and a lot of the event with the politics and other issue. And member of the LGBT community, women and pro-democracy join the Pride Parade. We also fight for the dictator regimes, and also we carrying the gender issue, for the example, gender equality, marriage equality, gender recognition, safe abortion, and legalize same-sex work in that time, and that's why we have a lot of the people join us. Next, please. And the thing that I think is important is not only the people, the student also. We saw a lot of the student protests in the public, and most of them, they mentioned about LGBT student issue, and they also mentioned about how to protect LGBT student in the school. Next, please. The thing that happened in Thailand, the student coming up to the protest is not because of the civil society support, but they support themselves. They have a lot of the activity for the such. They do the rally to around the Bangkok to protest in front of the school. They create the big protest in the Siam Paragon, in front of the Siam Paragon, and more than 10,000 people join, and they also go to the Ministry of the Education and do many brave activity that you see. Okay, next, please. Yeah, for our challenging is not only the me, but I think last picture is show how the youth and the student engage with us, and you will see that in this year we will do a lot of the protests to fight for the democracy and to fight for the gender equality and including LGBT people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wadao. We have three more speakers from Timor-Leste. Vietnam, and we have a special. We asked a participant to speak with regard to issues concerning intersex people. The next speaker we have is Belia Galos from Timor Leste. Bella is known as a fearless, outspoken female leader who was involved in transforming Timor-Leste before and after independence. She has survived from the final years of the many centuries Portuguese rule and Indonesian army occupying her country for almost 25 years. After 3 difficult years in the military, she escaped to Canada in a youth exchange program, and after Timor-Leste finally gained independence, Bella returned and worked for the UNDP to help rebuild her country. She also served as a former advisor to the president of Timor-Leste, and she founded a school for underprivileged children. She is now with Arcoiris, can you correct me if I'm wrong, Bella? An LGBTIQ plus organization in Timor-Leste, which means rainbow in Portuguese. Bella.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to get me be part of this amazing meeting with all the amazing activists, advocates from ASEAN region. So yes, we are Arcoiris Timor-Leste, and this is the first. You see the pictures of all the young LGBTs that in our care, in our organization. Pass, please. Next one. You can also pass this one. So here we go. So we are, before last year, March, we just a movement. And usually we started with, as a personal, a few of us. And the movement have become bigger and bigger for the last 2 years. So we decided to register ourselves to be an organization last year. And then today we have about more than 200, close to 300 active members of LGBT, young generations who have been neglected, isolated from almost everything in the country. As I listen to all the conversation today and all the information that has been passed on, basically we are just starting. There are so many things that we have been improving ourselves compared to countries like Indonesia or Malaysia. But there are a lot of things that we actually just starting, like we're starting in a basic. Next, please. So what exactly that we're doing here, we provide a safe space for sharing and learning for the LGBT young community here, simply because they do not have any place, anywhere to go in this country, and encourage physical and mental health and wellness, increasing their knowledge capacity to address family violence, bullying and discrimination and homophobia, which is very strong, started from their own family only. A lot of them disowned and beaten up, or even corrective rapes also taking place in the home in order to the idea of correcting them. And we support them with the leadership buildings, and economic empowerment is a lot of activities that we enroll these young LGBTs, simply because most of them are dropout from school. All of them are hardly even finished high school. They're either in primary school, middle school, or hardly. We find a lot of them that actually finish high school. And we created a space where we find a lot of evidence about their life. And about 3 years ago, we actually produced a first survey that myself and my partner, we actually produced it with the help of ASEAN Caucus. Thanks for that, and Ryan's in particular. All that has been taking place, and the network that we have now at the national level, regional, and international levels. Next, please. And then from the survey that I was mentioned, and this is what we found, is alarming actually. that 80% of those young people are drop out school. And you can imagine if you do not have education, I don't see how you can move forward with a better life. And more than almost 70% largely depending on their parents. But depending the parents, it means that only a few parents actually a little bit open-minded about their situation, but not refuse to know exactly who they are and what they're going to do with their life, and or they follow their friends who actually willing to give space for them to sleep over or they keep on moving around, or some of them who have partner but in a secret, basically they hide who they are, and if they have partner then they will call it friends. And rejection and family violence is such a issue here in East Timor, because East Timor is quite known for its domestic violence. We still, it's a cultural thing, still believe it's a normal things. And we still have to address this issue. And talking about LGBT is even worse. Yeah, following, next please. So this is the space that we provided. We started from our home only. We give them a space where they can come. Most of them come. We turn them. We training them to some skills that they all wanted. Mostly they want the carpenter work or landscaping or gardening. Or some of them they want to do computer work. Or some of them even wanted to learn how to read and write. And some of them just to come by, just to have their clothes washed, or food to eat, or just to meeting their friends. Next, please. So I myself actually teach myself through YouTube. I learned how to use all the carpenter work. In order to pass it on to them, I learned landscaping, gardening, and all that beside my professional work. So we have been doing all this work, and actually some of our some of the leader, like Dr. Deidrah Zorta, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, 1996, he actually introduced us to some members of the governments, as well as international people who are in the country, to actually use these young people's skills in landscaping or doing carpenter work and provide those services, which can allow them to have some money. Next, please. So this is the kind of work that the boys are doing. They like to address to be called as boys. They really don't like to be called their real name, which is like mostly Catholic name, just like the Philippine Timor is also the second large community of Catholic in the region. So this is the kind of work we're working, and mostly we do the wood work. We're recycling. We're not cutting trees or anything like that, but we're collecting some of the materials, garbage that people throwing here and there, or people consider as a garbage. We collect it and we turn it to be available things, and can make money out of it. Next, please. And the work that we're doing, we actually been giving a chance 3 times already. We do our exhibition. One was first time was hosted by Dr. Deidrah Zorta, and then the European Unions, and as well as we work with the UN Women. And yes, yeah, the landscaping. Yes, follow, pass please. So the work that we've been doing actually now become a little bit known in the country for the skills that the young boys have been provided and proven. And we have rallies in the country. We do also have 3 times gay parades that we have, which is very, I can say it's a huge progress so far. So Timor-Leste have moving forward in a way, but we still have to deal with a lot of basic stuff that inquire a lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bella. It's nice to hear that positive growth in terms of community organizing and advocacy in Timor-Leste. Thank you for that. All right. Our second to the last speaker for this panel is Vuong Ka Phong from IC Vietnam, currently working as the LGBTI program coordinator at the Institute for Studies of Society, Economy, and Environment, an NGO working for the advancement of human rights in Vietnam with a focus on LGBTI issues. Vuong Ka Phong.
Hey guys, my name is Fong. The pronoun is he, him, and I'm currently working as a LGBTI program coordinator at IC. We are a local NGO working for human rights in Vietnam. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I would like to talk a bit about next slide. Next. Yeah, so we don't have much time, so I would just get started on. I think it's important to know the context of the country before we talk about any particular achievement or challenges. So Vietnam has a very specific context that allows LGBTIQ activism to progress. For example, we have never criminalized LGBTIQ people, but we also don't have any recognition and or protection of LGBTIQ people in the legal framework. Regarding religions, it's mainly Buddhism with some strand of Christianity. For the most part of the movement, we haven't seen much religious pushback. So in that aspect, it is much less of a challenge than other countries in the region. Society is very traditional. I'm sure we all know the rigid patriarchy, gender role, gender stereotype. That is the binary of gender. That is also affecting LGBTIQ people in Vietnam. And the political climate also play a very big part in LGBTIQ activism. Human rights in general is considered a very sensitive topic. We don't have much of the basic freedoms that is guaranteed in other countries, such as the right to demonstration, the right to association, the freedom of press or of opinion or religion. So LGBTIQ activism is fit into that context in some way. For example, it is a very strategic positioning that we kind of position ourselves as an ally to the government, and that gives us a bit more leeway to do the things that is otherwise considered very sensitive, such as marching during Pride, for example. So the LGBTIQ movement is one of the few social movements that is able to be the container to push the message of human rights, of the freedom to associate, of freedom to demonstrate. Yeah, next slide. So a few of the approach. We have a good grassroots base and very diverse scene of civil society. Next slide. I would like to take an example of this is Pride in Vietnam in 2017. Over 30 provinces with their own committee, spanning the span of like 2 months. So a lot of the work is done by local organizations, supported by NGOs, and these are the people who will bring information and up-to-date knowledge to the Vietnamese people living all across Vietnam. Next slide. Next. I would talk a bit about policy advocacy. Sorry, go back. Sorry, can you go back one slide? Go back. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So a few of the achievements, such as we recently succeeded in advocating for the right to legal gender recognition of transgender people in the Civil Code of 2015. However, implementation remains to be an issue of the government drafting a law that is not up to the international standard and forcing people to undergo a mandatory hormone treatment in order to access legal gender recognition, which is an issue. We recently succeeded in advocating for the unban of same-sex marriage. However, same-sex marriage is also not legal in Vietnam. So it is not banned, but it is also not legal. We also engage a lot with international human rights mechanisms and working closely with the government in a very constructive way to push these messages into legislation. Okay, last slide. So a few challenges. The legal framework in Vietnam is very, very lacking. Also, attitude towards human rights, of course, hinders activities of all civil society, including the human rights, the LGBTIQ activism. As with a lot of countries, we have an uneven resource distribution. Resources usually focus on the big cities and not the small remote provinces. The Vietnamese media recently has a lot of visibility, so it kind of creates a false sense of progress to the general public that okay, LGBT people are very open on the media. That must mean they are okay in life. But we all know that visibility doesn't necessarily equal empowerment, and LGBT people in Vietnam still face a lot of day-to-day discrimination, both systematically and socially. Okay, and I think that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you, Phong, for giving us that situation or that outline both the current status and also the challenges that the community faces in Vietnam. Our last speaker for this panel is someone known to lawyers, law students, and advocates here in the Philippines. They're very much familiar with our last speaker. His case is a landmark decision as he was the first Filipino intersex who was legally allowed by the Supreme Court to change gender markers in 2008. He is the co-founder and officer in charge of Intersex Philippines and the newly elected co-chair of Intersex Asia. We'd like to call on Jeff Kagandahan. Jeff, welcome.
I cannot share my screen. Can you show the? Yes, can you show me my slide?
Oh, Jeff, it's good now.
Okay, thank you. Now, can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. Okay. I will talk about the intersex issues across Southeast Asia. Yeah. Okay. Let me start by doing some statistics. Yeah. Southeastern Asia's population is equivalent to 8.5% of the total population. It is according to the United Nations. And last January 2021, the United Nations estimate the population of Southeast Asia as 672,262,162. And based on the United Nations Intersex Fact Sheet, 1.7% of the population are born with intersex traits. And that is approximately 11,428,456. And with these numbers, now we will know that intersex are not rare. Yeah. And some of the issues is invisibility. Okay. Why do you think why do we think that only a small number of people have publicly came out as intersex? Where are the rest of the intersex people? Yeah. Because of shame, secrecy. Yeah. Because of shame, they think parents think that being intersex is uh, shame to the family, and being intersex is a curse. Yeah. Some believe that uh, the parents of intersex child have since have uh, have since that the God cursed them, and uh, and because of that, they want it to keep they want it to be a secret, or they want it to remain secret. Yeah. Because they don't want to the child to receive to be bullied, and sorry. Uh, some do not know that they have also intersex variation, because not all intersex traits can be seen during birth. Some can be seen during puberty. Uh, some do not know that they have intersex variation, either because they have not been properly diagnosed, or not have been told by their doctors and parents about their conditions. Some also reject the term intersex because of its negative association with hermaphrodite. Uh, Hermaphrodite is the old term used to describe intersex, and uh, and 40 plus there are 40 plus intersex variation, and hermaphrodite is only one of them. One of the problem is also lack of awareness. Doctors uh, believe and think that being intersex is a condition that need to be corrected. Many intersex children undergo surgery in an effort to normalize them, even though these interventions are often invasive, irreversible, and not performed for emergency reasons. Uh, we truly believe that intersex child should have the right to choose whatever gender marker he wants or she wants when the time, uh, the right time. Parents are also not properly informed about the potential risks. The reality is that the procedure performed on intersex children can cause major problems, including infertility, pain, and lifelong psychological sufferings. All this is just to make children conform to the society's idea of being male and female. Yeah. Up to 40% of these surgeries have complications. Many of these require follow-up surgeries. And of all the intersex people I meet, uh, uh, majority of them don't want feel sad about the surgery they have undergone during their childhood. Yeah. We believe that it is the society that needs fixing, not our bodies. Uh, and we also at Intersex Philippines and Intersex Asia want want the want to share positive awareness about being intersex. Yeah. Uh, while our LGBT brothers and sisters are being out and proud with regards to intersex, yeah, uh, they are really good in hiding, yeah, and because of that, there's a lack of intersex community in not only in Southeast Asia, but within the world. And out of the 11 countries in Southeast Asia, uh, there are five which Intersex Asia has no connections and has no contacts. Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, Singapore, and Timor-Leste. But uh, when we talk about intersex community, Intersex Philippines is taking the lead as the only intersex-led organization in Southeast Asia. We have just did our first forum in 2020, 2019, and our strategic planning this 2020, last 2020. And hopefully, to those participants and who's staying in Brunei, Cambodia, Laos, and Singapore and Timor-Leste, if you happen to know an intersex person, please refer it to Intersex Asia. Lack of research and resources. Yeah, there's no records or data about the exact number of intersex, few resources and funds for intersex community. Yeah, and Intersex Asia was established in February 2018 to give voice to the intersex community. Intersex Asia is an autonomous regional network. Sorry. Yeah. Uh, yeah. We uh, please, if you happen to know an intersex person, please let us know. And through our advocacy, yeah, intersex issues advocacy, we truly believe that the I will not stand for invisible anymore. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think that your last slide is really excellent in the sense that it tells us the message that the I in intersex means that you would not stand for being invisible anymore. And we wish you the best in your advocacy for your community. Thank you once again, and to all our speakers for informing us of the latest developments and the current situations with regard to the LGBTQI plus community in sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, and to all the speakers for informing us of the latest developments and the current situations with regard to the LGBTQI plus community in the various countries in Southeast Asia. Um, we are running around 10 to 15 minutes late. But before we proceed to the next panel, and we have a very esteemed lineup of guests for the next panel, so please don't leave the webinar yet. I think we can all take a 3-minute break to breathe, to stand up, stretch, and rest our eyes. All right. We will start with a second panel with our esteemed parliamentarians and policy specialist guests after 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Dissertation and her thesis, her MA thesis, focused on issues relating to transgender women. She is currently among the board of directors of STRAP, or the Society of Transsexual Women Advocates of the Philippines. Brenda is a lecturer at the University of Hong Kong, where she teaches sexuality and gender and transgender studies with upcoming publications on transgender people's experiences. As an activist for LGBTQI and women, she has been featured as an expert on TV and radio programs And in 2018, Brenda was awarded the LGBT Public Champion in Hong Kong and delivered the speech at the UN Human Rights Council that year. I'm very pleased to welcome to Rainbow Parl, Dr. Brenda Alegre. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you, Carlo. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I was really very nervous because of the connectivity issues. Maraming salamat. Mabuhay. And thank you so much to the Embassy of Canada, the Government of Canada, and of course, ASEAN SOGIE Caucus for having me. It is such an absolute honor to be moderating this panel. And because we are on a very tight schedule, let me go straight to the first part of our panel, which is for me to introduce our esteemed, amazing panelists. And I'll be beginning with my kababayan and a fellow Trans Pinay, the Honorable Geraldine Batista Roman. Honorable Geraldine Roman is the duly elected representative of the 1st District of Bataan and the first transgender woman elected to the Philippine Congress. She is a passionate advocate of equality, which stands for education, quality, and universal health care, agriculture, livelihood, infrastructure, transparency in government, and youth. To advance the said advocacy, she co-authored, supported, and filed bills that promote the rights of the marginalized sector, particularly the Caregivers Welfare Act, the Filipino Farmers First Act, Philippine Online Filipino Farmers First Act, Philippine Online Library Act, Hospital Classification Act, and the SOGIE Equality Bill, among many others. Of course, the SOGIE Equality Bill is very, very important to us. The US magazine's Foreign Policy has awarded her as one of its 100 leading global thinkers of 2016 for being a challenger, for redefining fitness to govern, and for pushing for the SOGIE Equality Act. And of course, on a personal level, one of the heroes of our movement. She was also recognized by Time Magazine as one of the most inspiring women of 2016. That is together with Hillary Clinton and Beyonce. So without further ado, and to give us the big picture and of course the situation for the Philippines in terms of SOGIE legislation, our Honorable Geraldine Roman. Hello, Congresswoman.
Hello, Brenda. How are you? I'd like to thank you very much. I'd like to greet my fellow panelists in today's discussion and give you a brief insight into the anti-discrimination bill that we have been fighting for in the Philippines since the late 1990s up to the present. And this anti-discrimination bill is more popularly known as a SOGIE Equality Bill. So let's go to the first slide. I'd like to give you a very brief history of this legislative measure. In the 11th Congress in the Philippines, which was in the late 1990s, the late Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, as well as former Akbayan Representative Loreto Eta Rosales, filed the anti-discrimination bill based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. In the succeeding Congresses, there were several attempts, but they either failed at the committee level in the lower house or there was no counterpart bill in the Senate. So fast forward, we go to the 17th Congress, which is the Congress that is before this present Congress. We were able to file and have it approved in the lower house, at the House of Representatives, with a unanimous vote. But its Senate version, which was filed by Senator Risa Ontiveros, was stalled. Some of the senators obviously applied delaying tactics, and they eventually killed the bill. So next slide. So in the 17th Congress, it was approved, and now at the 18th Congress, we have around 11 versions of this anti-discrimination bill based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, which is called the SOGIE Equality Bill. Aside from that, we also have a more comprehensive anti-discrimination bill, which is on the basis of race, age, civil status, health status, religion, ethnicity, and disabilities, etc., etc. So these are two anti-discrimination bills. One is SOGIE specific, while the other one is more comprehensive. So the status of both bills is that they are both being heard at the committee level. In the 18th Congress, Senator Risa Ontiveros sponsored the bill, and it has been passed on first reading. No, not only the first reading, but it's on second reading. It's already being discussed at the floor. Okay, so next slide, please. What is the SOGIE Equality Bill? The SOGIE Equality Bill is basically an anti-discrimination bill, which aims to protect everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, from all forms of discrimination. In particular, discrimination at the workplace, in schools, in the delivery of government services, in access to commercial and public establishments and facilities. In other words, these are just basic rights that all Filipino citizens should enjoy. So it aims to address discrimination that is based on one's sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. And the common misconception is that this is only going to benefit the LGBT community. And the opponents seem to ignore the fact that everyone has sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. And if you are straight and you happen to be discriminated against because you are straight, you can use this bill. So next slide. What are the different discriminatory practices that are identified under the SOGIE Equality Bill? The way the bill is crafted is that we define, of course, the terms, and we define what are the different practices that could be considered discriminatory and could be duly penalized. To give an example, for example, the denial of access to public service, including military service, to any person on the basis of one's SOGIE, the inclusion and disclosure of one's sexual orientation and gender identity expression in hiring, you see, in determining who gets promoted, or in firing people. If you are fired because of your SOGIE, well, that is a discriminatory practice. For example, in schools, if you are refused admission into a learning institution because you happen to be gay or transgender or lesbian, or you have a different form of gender expression that others may deem as non-conventional, well, this is also a discriminatory practice. The imposition of disciplinary sanctions, penalties that are harsher than what is customary and that infringe on the rights of students on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, is also considered a form of discrimination. The refusal and revocation of accreditation to any organization or group based on SOGIE, which happened in our country. I remember, I think it was in the 2016 elections, the LGBTQ plus party list, LED, applied for a permit to be able to field its candidates, from the Philippine Commission on Elections. But they were denied because, according to the COMELEC, it went against public morals. So that was a form of discrimination, and it was duly recognized by the Supreme Court. But there is an absence of legislation. I'll give you further examples of discriminatory practices. When you are outed by somebody without your authorization, that is also a form of discrimination. When people engage in hate speech meant to shame, insult, vilify members of the LGBT community or people on the basis of their SOGIE SC, that is discriminatory. When you refuse entry to transgender people into bars and restaurants because they happen to be transgender, that is also discriminatory. When you prevent a child under parental authority, custody, or guardianship from exhibiting their SOGIE or manifesting rejection of such child's SOGIE that is discriminatory. So basically, if you subject a person to any other analogous act, uh, uh, that it would be discriminatory. Okay, what are the common misconceptions about the SOGIE Equality Bill? Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Okay. During the committee hearings, the opponents of this bill would say that this is class legislation, meaning that these bills will provide the members of the LGBT community special rights and privileges, which is a big mistake. It's false, because what we are fighting for are basically basic human rights that all Filipinos should enjoy. Some have also falsely accused the SOGIE Equality Bill as a same-sex marriage bill. It is not. It has no provision that deals with marriage equality. The opponents have also accused this bill of being a gender recognition law that will allow members of the trans community to change their legal gender markers. Even in the last committee, there was this resource person who belongs to the evangelical practice who accused this bill of allowing pedophilia and necrophilia. He said that pedophilia and necrophilia are sexual orientations, which they are not, okay? And they even said that it would be a violation of the rights of straight people. So it's really absurd. And they even said that it would be a violation of their religious freedom, which is the most abused argument and fallacy that they have employed. So other misconceptions, next slide, please. Okay, these have been answered. Let's proceed to next slide. Okay, the challenges. The world is, well, under the problem of the COVID-19 pandemic. We not only in the Philippines, so all kinds of legislation is being focused on our response to this pandemic. So there are some sectors and some people who say that the SOGIE Equality Bill is not urgent. Also, the composition of the Philippine Congress in the 18th Congress right now is rather that it does not favor, the passage of this bill. In the previous House leadership was led by a man who was admittedly very conservative, and although he allowed the open discussion, and also we have members who are representatives of fundamentalist Christian organizations. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it very difficult for us to lobby for the bill because we all work from home. Nothing beats a person-to-person dialogue and trying to convince our colleagues to sign and support the bill. Also, there has been a misinformation and disinformation campaign that has been going on, although in the recent months, everything is focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is not a problem as of the moment. So finally, let's take a look at the status of the SOGIE Equality Bill. This is the legislative process that we all have to undergo. Right now, the bill is on step 2. We are at, it's being deliberated on at the committee, in the Committee on Women and Gender Equality, but it has the support of the committee members. So we still have 3 steps left, you see. Okay, let's go to the final slide. Okay, I think that's the final slide already. So we remain unfazed, and we remain determined in our desire to have an anti-discrimination bill passed in this legislature. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat, Congresswoman Roman. We're going to hear more from Congresswoman Roman and all our panelists when they're all done. So we're going to go through each of our panelists to represent the situations of their countries in the region. We will have also a Q&A portion after our panel discussion. So may I remind our audiences who are watching that please keep your questions within the purview of the discussion or the presentation. Maraming salamat, Congresswoman Roman. As a trans Pinay who grew up in the Philippines, I definitely feel the urgency of being protected by the SOGIE Equality Bill. So we'll invite you again shortly. For now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Honorable Tunyawaj Kamolwangwat. Tumyawaj Kamalwangwat was elected in 2019, the first Thailand election from the last coup. He was one of the 4 LGBTQI plus members of parliament who first stepped into the Thailand parliament. He was part of the Future Forward Party, but it was dissolved by Thailand Constitutional Court. Thereafter, the Move Forward Party was established. Now, Tunyawaj continues to work with them. On the 19th of June 2020, Tunyawaj filed the Marriage Equality Bill. It made the hashtag marriage equality trend on Twitter for 4 days. There were over at least 1 million viewers and more than 60,000 people who commented on the bill on the Thailand Parliament website. Now, Tunyawaj is developing a gender policy. He tries to include gender equality with the idea of gender-responsive budgeting. He came up with the idea for the 4 jigsaws, which he's going to discuss today. Honorable Kamal Wangwat, welcome to the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad, and thank you for having me in this panel. I'm so glad, and I want to say hi from the Parliament in the Thailand Parliament, and I just done the debate in the Parliament about the copyrights, the draft of copyright law. So right now, I have got a topic from you about the social legislation. So I think this a good topic to see what will happen next to make equality happen for LGBT plus. Okay, next slide. Okay, I believe that you know all about this. SOGIE, what is all about SOGIE? Okay, we talk about the gender identity, we talk about the gender expression, we talk about the biological sex, we talk about the sexual orientation. I think this model is very, make me distinguish about the how can we make equality happen. Okay, next slide. Okay, there are 4 jigsaw for me to make the equality happen. First jigsaw is Thailand Constitution. Next slide. Actually, there are no SOGIE legislation in Thailand Constitution, because only men and women are on the Thai Constitution. So we don't have about the LGBTQ plus the word in Thai law, so everything about the budgeting, everything about the how can make equality. So Thailand no data for LGBTQ. They just have only men and women data. Okay, next slide. And I'm sorry. No. Be back, please. Actually, I'm sorry because I cannot translate for you. I want to describe about the Thai Constitution. In the right side is the Thai Constitution. They talk about the men and women only. And the right side, and you will see the red letters. I will put it in. Because the first red letter is biological sex. And the third paragraph is like expression and sexual orientation. And the last red letter in the 4th paragraph is LGBTQ plus. If we make it happen on Thai Constitution, everything will change because it's a Thai Constitution is a cause of problem. Okay, the first paragraph is talk about if you see the first paragraph is talk about the equality, and the second part is talk about the men and women. And the third paragraph is talk about the discrimination will not happen. We have the Constitution have to protect it. And the third and the fourth paragraph is talk about the budgeting. Thailand has got the Women Fund because we have a space for LGBTQ lady part. We don't have LGBTQ equality this so, but for the lady we have a lady park, you know, we have a women fund, we have many things about the women, but we don't have for LGBTQ. If we put it in, it will happen in the fourth paragraph. Next slide. The second jigsaw, if we want to keep the data unstereotype men and women, we have to make the gender recognition bill and name title. It make the human data in Thailand unstereotype. We will have a data for the people, how much population, women how much population, and men how much population. So gender recognition is very important to unstereotype all data in Thailand. Next slide. One big problem for this inequality is gender stereotype serial register. Government unable advocate budgeting effective. Gender recognition and name title bills are gender blindness. Deconstruction. You see, it's deconstruction. Gender responsive budgeting will be effective because right now gender responsive budgeting just only effective for women, but not for LGBT. And it will be the first time gender responsive budgeting with LGBT in the world, if it will be happen. Okay, next slide. Okay, the third jigsaw, we talk about the gender responsive budgeting and then gender cost. Okay, next slide. If you see gender cost subsidize is idea, we heard some from some country, they have a gender cost subsidized, you know, about the sanitary napkin, some of country for free and some country and that free, you know. But we think it over. Think it over. If the gender cost is caused from the inequality, the transgender need hormone because the hormone is a gender cost, you know, for them, for transgender. And you know about the PEP and PrEP for HIV, maybe some people want to make the masculine muscle. It's a gender cause. We can dissolve the gender cause for the LGBTQ if we try to create all the gender and see gender cause, and we can make the subsidized. If you see the table, and you will see that it's a gender cost subsidized. Yes, next slide. The last jigsaw is LGBTQIN health and well-being. Next slide. I want to, if we have a population for LGBT for after gender recognition and name title, so I can ask for the budgeting to make the LGBT clinic happen everywhere in Thailand if we have much population. Next slide. Because about the health and well-being, about the mentality, if the youth has got a problem with the family and they afraid to coming out, they need someone to advise, they need some doctor to talk to, they need someone to talk to. And hormones for transgender, how to use it and not dangerous. And for HIV PrEP's pill for protection, and infection disease, and more. I think that LGBT clinic has to provide a service specified for LGBTQ. Next slide. Okay, it's my conclusion. This model, I'm talking about the gender identity, expression, biological sex, sexual orientation. If you see that's a lot of things have to do, you know. If we talk about the sexual orientation, the down below, we talk about the same-sex marriage and health well-being bills and gender cost subsidized and LGBTQIN fund, you know, and biological sex, okay, is Thai constitution, and next is biological sex recognition. So we have already men and women, but it's stereotype. And healthcare and well-being and marriage, women bill, protection, women, and about the children rights, women cost subsidized, and women fund. I think biological sex is already almost complete, but not for LGBTQ. But expression, the second line, you will see that gender recognition again, and the next bill is health, well-being, and next is name title bill, and next is gender cause, and next is discrimination protection bills, and the last is LGBTQ fund. So if you ask me about the gender identity, I try to work it hard to make gender identity happen. But gender identity, I believe that it's space for philosophy, it's space for ideological, for creativity, to free yourself, to free themselves happen, and is a cause from it will become to your expression. So the Thailand, we try to talk about democracy and freedom of speech to make the new thing happen in our works. So it's my conclusion, Sogic legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kamal Wangwat. And I think it's such a great learning opportunity for us to discover, how you have unpacked the jigsaw and how you're trying to put it together and how you're able to relate the SOGIE SC legislation with at a very understandable model, which is the gender-bred person. So thank you. We're going to talk to you again in a bit. Thank you. And
Thank you.
now, thank you so much. I would like to introduce our third panelist, Dr. Phan Lan Huong. Dr. Phan Lan Huong received his Doctors of Law from the Graduate School of Law of Nagoya University in Japan. She is currently teaching law on public administration at Hanoi Law University. Regarding research in human rights, especially the rights of disadvantaged groups, she has worked as a national consultant for international organizations in Vietnam, such as the UN Women, the UNDP, UNICEF. She focuses on analyzing current issues and gaps of Vietnamese laws in comparison with international standards. Her research has advocated for lawmaking in Vietnam towards developing a comprehensive legal framework for the protection of human rights in Vietnam. Let's all welcome Dr. Phan Lan Huong. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everyone. It's my great pleasure to share with you about the case of Vietnam regarding to the LGBTQI. So please show my presentation. Yes. Because time is limited, so I would like to focus to the three key points. First is about the social context. It's the main cause for the discrimination against the LGBTQI, and the current is about the second point about legal issue. In the case of related to the right of the LGBT and some recommendation. Next slide, please. For the social context of the Vietnam, cost to the discrimination against the LGBTQI, so I think it's similar to the other ASEAN country from the culture, belief, and religions. It's like a conflict or discriminate against LGBTQI community. So I move to next slide, please. Oh, maybe it's not clear. Maybe the color have some problem. I just mentioned clearly that from the Buddhism's cultures, religions, and the people for gender discrimination, people prefer boys more than a man, the girls. So if a family, they have the boy, and then one day the boy wants to transgender to the girl, it's not acceptable. It's the root cause of discrimination against the LGBTQI. Next slide, please. And the other reasons from the cultures, from the HIV, the LGBTQI consider is like a root cause of the HIV pandemic, and also for the public awareness about the gender diverse orientation on the gender identity. It's still not the people lack of knowledge about the, that also cause discrimination against the LGBTQI in case of Vietnam. Next slide, please. So you know that, however, the societies in Vietnam is changing, and we see that some movement about the society, about the awareness of the Vietnamese people about the LGBTQI communities. And I give some information just in the data for you to see later. Next slide, please. And now I move to the second part about the legal issue related to the right of the LGBTQI. You can see that some changes in our law to meet the international standard. However, it still have many remaining issues. For example, you can see about the same-sex marriage. The first law in 2010 about the law on marriage and family, same-sex marriage is a prohibited act, and it considered is illegal. But however, amending law in 2014, next slide, please. Same-sex marriage is not illegal act anymore. However, the law, you can see there's the same case of Thailand. The law defines the man and woman in the law, so it's not referred to the LGBTQI group. And same-sex marriage is not legal except and not protected by the law. And the Article 8 of the law on family and marriage and family also define very clearly same-sex marriage. Ceremony is okay, it's acceptable, protected by law. Next slide, please. And one of the other movement of transgenders is the first time in the 2015, our civil court have recognized the right of the transgender. The people have the freedom to select their right. However, the implementation of this article is still limited in practice related to the changing the ID or change the birth certificate. And this also not clear that where transgender, they need to have operation or not in order to change their ID, because it's not clear have any guideline for implementation in this article of the Article 37 of this civil code. Next slide, please. And some issue related to the transgender people, as I mentioned about the difficulty in for changing their ID and their birth certificate. So it's also cause a problem if the transgender people, they want to get married and they are facing with difficulty of their marriage if recognized by law. And also it causes a problem in the, how to say, the law enforcement related to sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and for the prosecution for the other provide legal protection for those LGBTQI group. Next, please. So I would like to mention some of their legal issue, even that we also for the establishment of the LGBTQI community, but we still do not have a legal framework to establishment of like a CSOs related LGBTQI. It's very, how to say, for the community they can act, but for the process for legal protection to establish their own social organization is very challenging. And also the same-sex marriage is acceptable ceremony, but it's not protected. So they are related right to the, for example, right to adoption. And so the right to inheritance is still not clearly protected by the law. And also the difficulty in the legal processing for example, for the case of discrimination against LGBTQI, so those community cannot file for seeking for legal protection from because the law also lack of the definition, lack of the act to define what is a discrimination act against LGBTQI. Next slide, please. You see that in the Vietnam, nowadays we're still facing with many legal issues for the LGBTQI, and they also lack of, how to say, legal support, for example, law on legal aid also not provide those group is a disadvantaged group somehow, and for those groups they still facing with many difficulty. Next slide, please. So from the above study about the legal issue, I would like to give some recommendation about the case, like advocacy for the case of Vietnam. Thus, we need to continue to reform our constitution, our law. For example, the law on marriage and family, law, civil code, and a law on adoption to ensure the right of the LGBTQI. And also we need to advocate, how to say, ensure the LGBTQI community, they can establish their group, civil society group in Vietnam, and it's like a vital role in protect the rights of the LGBTQI. And also we also need to consider to provide very clear, determine clearly what is a discrimination act should be promulgated by the law, because so far we don't have any legal regulation related to discrimination against LGBTQI. And the last, we need to, how to say, promote advocacy, public awareness, we raising public awareness, introduce a training program about gender identity, gender orientation to the school, and to raise the public awareness about the diversion of the gender orientations. Yes, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wong. We're going to see you shortly again for our panel discussion.
Yes, thank you.
And our final panelist for today's session, we have the Honorable Charles Anthony Santiago. Honorable Santiago is a Malaysian Member of Parliament for Klang constituency in Selangor for the Democratic Action Party. He was first elected to Parliament in 2008 and is chairman of the Select Committee on Human Rights and Constitutional Affairs. Prior to his election, he was an economist and worked for non-governmental organizations, including as the chairman of the National Water Services Commission. He is APHR's chair and a regular commentator on regional issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Charles Santiago.
Thanks, Brenda, for that kind introduction, and fellow panelists. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. And fellow panelists, it's good to join you for this important discussion. Let me at the outset say in Malaysia that the Constitution, the Federal Constitution, Article 8(1), provides equal protection where every Malaysian is protected regardless of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or nationality. So Malaysia the Constitution protects its citizens across the board, including sexual orientation. Having said that, having said that, the reality on the ground is very different. I see in the case of Philippines, in the case of Thailand, you have bills in parliament, whether it's the anti-discrimination bill or the SOGIE equality bill or the SOGIE SC bill. There's some movement that is taking place in parliament in a positive way, but I cannot say that for Malaysia. So let me just make a quick point about some 3 points that I would like to make. The first point is just to give a background, at least in my view, on the LGBT issues in the short run, and then look at recent cases and issues, and then look at the way forward. Now, in 2012, very interestingly, the Ministry of Education in Malaysia came out with a very important, a very interesting guideline, a very provocative, discriminatory guideline on how to spot gay and lesbian children. And this is in the school, by the way. This is how the Ministry of Education discriminates people, identifies people, is by spotting gay and lesbian children in school. This is the most ridiculous thing you could have ever heard, but that happens in reality in Malaysia in 2012. Now, as a result of that, or something as a result of that kind of a thinking, a young boy, I think it's about at the time was 15 or 16 years of age, he was brutally butchered and all because he walked funny. He walked funny, and just because of walking funny, he was brutally beaten up and also sexually abused by his friends, by his own friends, actually. So you can see the discrimination against LGBTIQ is already planted in the system, where the system itself, where the government itself participates in discrimination of its own citizens. On one side, the Constitution provides protection for you, but in reality, it is not. It really does not give you any protection. And most recently, just 2 months ago, maybe just a couple of weeks ago, this very famous cosmetics entrepreneur. She's a multimillionaire. Sajad is her name. She was picked up by the moral police and questioned and beaten up. This is happening within the system itself, within the police system itself. So on one side, the system of education tells you, or the Ministry of Education tells you, that this is how you identify or you spot gay children. And here, the morally police, especially the ones involving religious groups, is also going after gay men and women. In this case, a cosmetics entrepreneur is a multimillionaire. It's not about class issue. We always think that the gay people who are working class get the worst. Maybe that is true, but here this is a multimillionaire cosmetics entrepreneur who was picked up and abused and beaten up quite badly by the moral police. So clearly in Malaysia, the LGBT community, LGBTI community, has got no protection. Really has no protection at all. And more recent, but I think sometime last year, a constituent in my in Klang, which I represent, name is Samira Krishnan. She had to flee. She had to flee my constituency and to go to another place. And these guys who she had complained to the police followed her, tracked her to this place in the East Coast, and shot her dead. So you can see the level of discrimination, the level of violence against LGBTQ community in Malaysia. Now, today we are faced with a pandemic. We are faced with a huge pandemic involving millions and millions of people, and lots of people are dying in the process. And members of the LGBT community are part and process of the frontliners who are actually protecting us, who are providing the support for people like us. But unfortunately, for some people, this is not acceptable. They are being hunted down in the context of a pandemic, in the context of a pandemic, and in the case of Malaysia in particular, in the context of an emergency. Now, most recently, a member of a deputy minister of the religious ministry, had made some very provocative statements against the LGBT community. And he went as far as saying that the Malaysian government will amend the Sharia laws, will amend the Sharia laws in order to mete out harsher punishments on lesbian, gays, and bisexuals and transgender. This is coming from Islamic Party, and now it is in government. And you can clearly see, and the guy actually goes on, the deputy minister goes on to say that he urged the public to come forward with information pertaining to LGBT individuals so that authorities can enforce action against them. So this is like going after individuals, going after people, identifying because of their sexual orientation, abusing them, violence against them, and discriminating against them. So clearly, this is in violation of the Federal Constitution of Malaysia, as well as what the Prime Minister of Malaysia, who recently said, just as late as last week, in the ASEAN conference, he talked about standing together against hate speech, against hate speech. So you have one Prime Minister saying all nice things to a regional audience, saying that all the governments of ASEAN must come together in order to fight against hate speech. But he's unable to mainstream his message. He's unable to mainstream his message to his own ministers, to his own cabinet, who are actually who are going after, who are attacking, and in a very violent fashion, discriminating against a very vulnerable community in a very, very difficult moment, especially in the pandemic. So clearly, Malaysia has got a long way to go in order for all Malaysian citizens to enjoy the fundamental human rights accorded to all citizens of the country. So my point is, I'm so happy to hear the presentations of Congresswoman Geraldine, Congressman Tunia Wat, the colleague from Thailand, and also from Philippines, and also from Vietnam, where you are in the legislative process already, which says there's some acceptance, although there's of course discrimination, there's always a pushback, all that understand, but we are actually fighting a different battle in Malaysia, a different battle. And I've tried to put forward a number of times anti-discrimination bill in Parliament, and it's got no traction at all. So we are really behind. Nothing positive to add, but except to say that we are hopeful that more Malaysians and also people in the region will support the LGBT community in Malaysia in protecting their rights. I think this is the key at this time, though, and to work around to provide the solidarity support for Malaysian groups which are right now under heavy attack and very vulnerable at this time. Thanks for your attention, and I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Santiago. And again, our panelists are amazing. They have been doing such amazing work the past years in terms of legislation and advancing the human rights of LGBTQI plus populations in their respective countries. So that's also looking at the regional level. We're inviting our participants, to send in their questions that's related to our discussions. But while we're waiting for these questions, maybe I can throw some questions. I can give some questions to our panelists, and I will work backwards. So we started with Honorable Roman earlier. So this time we'll start with you, Honorable Santiago. So you mentioned about the difficulty, of passing an anti-discrimination ordinance, and of course we understand the cultural situation in Malaysia, especially for us outsider who are reading and researching and learning from outside. If you had it your way, what would be the most effective approach in advancing an anti-discrimination bill and promoting an equality culture in Malaysia?
Well, to answer your second part of the question on equality culture in Malaysia, Malaysia does not practice an equality culture. It doesn't believe in it. We have a system which favors one group against the other. It's not a class issue, but it's a race issue. So dividing people is already inbuilt in the system. It's already inbuilt in the system. And the attack on the LGBT community is an extension of that. It's really an extension of that. Maybe an extreme extension of the division that we have in Malaysia. Malaysia is a very divided society. You come to Malaysia, you will never get the impression that we are so divided. But actually, deep down, the community and our society is very divided along race, religions lines. And now and that extension of that is the LGBTQ community, which is a very far the extreme outside of mainstream. First, I think what we need to do is we need to bring the LGBT community debate as part of mainstream. I think it's something that we have to do, to bring the debate that is taking place on the side to the main discussion, to the main table for discussion. I think that needs to happen. Number two, I think the groups in Malaysia, the LGBT community in Malaysia, needs to caucus with other groups in the country in order to find common grounds, in order to find common grounds, in order to put their agenda together with the agenda of others. And then the biggest problem we will have is to manage and to deal with the Islamic authorities. This is the biggest challenge, because now we have an Islamic party which is very conservative, that is really pushing very hard against the LGBT community. I mean, I guess, can you imagine, just for a moment though, just step back and let's think about this though. Here, we are trying to protect our lives, we're trying to save lives, we are trying to, educate people on how to use a face mask. You have a pandemic in front of you. But despite of all this thing that is happening, everybody's talking about, this party is focusing on going after LGBT community members. I mean, what do they have in their head? I mean, what is stuck in their head though? Clearly, somewhere along the line, they want to go as a way of showing to their supporters that in government, they can go after a very vulnerable community, and LGBT community, which is considered, something not acceptable within Islam. This is debatable, actually, by the way, but in Islam, for the mainstream Islam, this is not acceptable behavior or lifestyle. So this is the motivation that is happening, which is very unfortunate. And we need more Malay or Muslim leaders to stand up to fight against this. This is what we need. I can tell you, if what I'm saying goes public on Twitter or on Facebook and so on, assuming this is a Facebook Live, if you go to my Facebook after that or my Twitter account, the hate speech that I will be getting will be enormous. It'll be enormous. So I think this is it's more controlled here. But again, that tells you the level of non-intolerance, I must say, the level of intolerance that we have in this country.
Okay, thank you so much, Honorable Santiago. We do have a couple of questions already that was sent to us. So maybe we could ask Dr. Huang this first question. Can you share the legislative measures towards LGBTQI+ that are inclusive of the pandemic response?
Okay, in the case of Vietnam, as you will see that some changes from the society before 2000s, and especially in the 2013, when our government issued the new constitution which recognize the human right and protection of the human right. However, for the LGBTQI group, now they appear more, public, more open. And for societies, they are somehow increasing acceptable. However, for protections of the LGBTQI group, in the case of Vietnam, it's still a lot of challenges. For example, in the school, so discrimination against the LGBTQI, it still happen. And I just read on the newspaper, they mentioned that like a couple of the two girls, they like they lesbian, they fall in love, but the parent try to isolate them from the school because try to separate, and there no protection for the people in such cases, because it considered like a bullying or a violence, but no protection. And I could like to go back to detail the question, sorry, for legislative measures. And so far for the legislation measure, we try to advocate for the law on transgender. And if the law on transgender is approved, and then we can have more legal protection for the LGBTQI group. And also, we also advocate for the regulation on handling with the discrimination against the LGBTQI group. So legal regulation is still like in the long process for advocacy, and not yet submit or not yet put in the House's lawmaking agenda by the National Assembly in the case of Vietnam.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Huang. And then if we could go to Honorable Kamal Wong Wat, we have a question that we could probably address to you. What do you think is the tipping point of the LGBT movement in terms of passing SOGIE legislation in your country?
Yes, thank you for the question. The movement, SOGIE legislation. I think that there are many topics that the LGBTQ movement move to the make society aware about this, like marriage equality, human rights. I think is to show the people what they think, but in Thailand we have a deep problems about this, and sometimes we cannot talk much about the belief, about the something cannot change. So I think that it's a big problem. Yeah, it's a big problem if we try to as a policymaker, I think that try to dissolve all the conflict and make it happen. Okay, if you ask me about the movement, I think that they separate each other sometimes because some of movement work with the government and receive some budget from the government. So some of them cannot talk much about the equality, and sometimes we cannot sure that if they work for some bills, if they work for some issue, some of who believe in democracy and equality truly, they have to ask themselves that they can believe all the things some of the side can say, the LGBTQ movement from some side. So in LGBT, so my conclusion is LGBTQ in Thailand has got a right wing and a left wing. And sometimes we cannot make it, everything do agree together, cannot make it forward. That is because this conflict. That is because some issue that they had before. As a member of parliament, I be here in the parliament for 1.5 years. I see many conflict, and the next step for me is try to make the gender recognition happen. And I'm trying to inclusive everyone together and make it happen together. Yes.
Thank you so much, Honorable Kamal Wong Wat. And to Congresswoman Roman, I think I'm incorporating one of the questions from the Q&A session to a question that I've also drafted. How do you think can lawmakers like you who support the SOGIE equality bill can navigate, our space in the Philippines, the diaspora of the Philippines, wherein religion and religiosity has strong interconnections to lawmaking?
Well, you know what? I am a practicing Catholic. As you can see, my house is filled with religious images. And basically, the message that I send to my fellow Catholic and Christian legislators is that having respecting and having compassion for marginalized sectors of society. It's a basic Christian tenet, really. It's a basic Christian teaching. You cannot say that you are a true Christian by discriminating more against your fellow men and women. I say that you become more Christian by affording them the same rights and privileges that everyone enjoys. Of course, this is from the Catholic perspective. But from the fundamentalist or evangelical perspective, they have a very literal interpretation of the Bible. But of course, they seem to ignore the fact that the Bible is a book that has to be taken and understood from a cultural and historical context. So the good thing is that the Philippines has a majority of Catholic Christians, and slowly even the church hierarchy, and this is best exemplified by the Pope himself, Pope Francis, has shown compassion towards members of the LGBT community. So I would just want to point out, I always try to point out the hypocrisy of those who profess themselves to be true Christians and at the same time seem to have a grand time discriminating against people from the LGBT community. I tell them, when you discriminate against members of the LGBT community, you call that religious freedom. But when we call you out for discriminating against us, you call that religious persecution. So really, there's a great deal of hypocrisy on the part of these fundamentalist Christians. So my hope is that by convincing them, when you have a main or a important religion like Catholicism, and you have the Pope speaking in favor of compassion, of being inclusive, of LGBT people having the right to belong to families and to have their own families, and they have the right to work and of course to be respected. Well, that helps a lot. That helps a lot, really. So my constant reminder to my fellow legislators is that you cannot use religion as a blanket excuse to discriminate against your fellow human being. Because if your religion is teaching you how to hate, maybe it's time to consider a change in religion. My gosh. So that is how I approach this, Have I answered your question, Brenda?
Yes, Congresswoman. And I have a follow-up also. Because of one of the most painful experiences as a trans Pinay last year was the decision of pardoning Pemberton. That was, of course, an executive decision of President Duterte. How has this affected you in any way? And do you think this has any way affected also the violence towards LGBTQ people in the Philippines, you think?
Okay. On a personal level, that decision hurt me. Of course, because I am a trans woman myself. But being the politician that I am, I understand that there are certain negotiations that happen between two or several foreign governments in the attempt of one government to protect its citizens who are staying in another country. In this case, we expected that Pemberton would be protected by the US government. Now, I'm not privy to what happened in those negotiations, but it suffices to say that we should all be aware that these are intergovernmental negotiations, and these things happen. Sometimes a government, through its foreign affairs department, would ask something from another government, and something would be given in exchange, and these things happen. Developed countries have a way of protecting their citizens abroad. Whether they are European citizens or North American citizens, these things happen. Now, this is just explained from a political point of view. Now, from a moral point of view, I would place myself in the position of the family of the victims. And definitely, that would be an unacceptable decision. Okay, masakit yun. It's painful. Basically, if you place yourselves in the shoes of the victim's family, I mean, how could you possibly have an explanation for that? Yes, Brenda. Brenda?
Panelists, so to our amazing panelists, our final question. If you could just keep it brief as well. If you can address the LGBTQI population in your respective countries to, how they can work more effectively with you or how you can work more effectively with them, what do you think should be the strategy for 2021, in terms of putting forward the legislations needed by your respective countries? We can start with you, Congresswoman.
Yes. You know what? The main problem of the LGBT community in my country is that it is quite polarized. Some people, especially those who feel very passionate about what their the other advocacies are, tend to marginalize those who are diametrically opposed to their opinions. So my strategy and my appeal to the LGBT community here in the Philippines is to set aside our differences and rather focus on the things that bind us when it comes to our fight for the LGBT community. I know there are those who will argue that human rights about the intersectionality of human rights, which is really true. But on a practical level, if we if we adopt this cancel culture and this woke culture of continuously and consistently canceling politicians or other advocates who may not share our opinions on other issues, then we will be left with no allies. We need allies, not enemies, in the fight for LGBT rights. So this is basically my message of unity to the entire LGBT community in the Philippines. Thank you, Brenda.
Honorable, thank you so much, Honorable Congresswoman. Honorable Kamal Wang Wat.
Hello. Yes.
Yes. Yes, the same question. We're requesting if you could address the LGBTQI plus community in Thailand to work with you and other legislators in improving strategies for advancing legislations for protection and recognition.
The strategies. Um, the first thing I try to connect them, like I told you. Truly, I said truly. Sincerity. I try to. My strategy is try to speak to everyone because, okay, I'm done about. I finished to bring the gender, the marriage equality into the parliament and waiting for the debate and the processing to pass this law. So I have to think about what is the next step. And the LGBTQ movement in the right wing and the left wings, that is, has got many issue each other. And I believe in the left side. So, but I have to talk to the right wing also. So I try to speak and talk to everyone that, okay, we have to forget something to step forward. And I know that we have a conflict before, but if we want to make it happen, we have to step over and leave the old problem. And you no need to forget that. Okay, you hate each other, it's okay, but we have to work together because in the left wing is very important because it's about the youth, about the new generation, it's about what the new thing happen. And on the other hand, the right wing is very important because the man who's got power, they are all in these sides. In changing this Thai constitution, like 40 saw, like I told you when I'm discussed in my panel, it will not happen if they don't pass our bill. Because in Thailand, constitution has got many problems because any law cannot pass if the senator not allowed. I think it's a big problem and I try to make everyone speak each other, look each other, and step together. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congress. And then Dr. Huang for Vietnam.
Thank you. I'm not the legislators, like they are honored. However, I think from the Vietnam is aspect, I think that we first go to, how can you say, to building capacity for LGBTQI community. So they can, how to say, have a strong network and advocate and give the, how to say, protection to LGBTQI group. And also the second thing, I think that can have a cooperate with the other social and NGO, CSO NGO, to and also with the government to, how to say, raising public awareness about sexual orientation. So for that approach, so we can change the public awareness, eliminating discrimination, and also for advocacy for the law on like a SOGIE, like in the case of Philippines or in the case of Thailand. I think it's for quite long process before, because the LGBTQI is like the most priority in the case of Vietnam. So it will take long process. However, we can advocate for the, for example, enact the degree, say like a level for discrimination against violation of discrimination against LGBTQI. So we have to go step by step. But I think the first thing we should building capacity for LGBTQI community in Vietnam to develop a strong network. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Huang. And finally, Honorable Santiago.
Thanks, Brenda. I think my view is going forward for this year, the LGBT community is going to come under more attack. There's going to be more violence against the community, given the larger political turmoil in the country. There will, as you know, Malaysia is now in an emergency up till August of this year. And this further puts a vulnerable community further into vulnerability, I must say. And I think when you are under attack and when you are there's going to be more violence against you, it is important for the community to build allies. Allies within the community itself as well as outside the community. And I think more people need to stand up. More people need to stand up in terms of protecting people's rights, especially people with different sexual orientation. And I think in this context, it's important for more public awareness, especially on sexual orientation of people, and that's something that should be inclusive, that should be part of any society, and especially in the case of Malaysia, where it's protected by the Constitution. We have a problem, as I said. The Constitution says, yes, you are protected, but we have a very big, large Islamic community in the country, which is quite significant, very powerful, highly funded in government, that has a different agenda, a different narrative. And I think this narrative has to be challenged. But in order for that to happen, the community itself must reach out, must come up with a common agenda and a counter narrative as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all our amazing panelists, and thank you for the work that you have been doing. And I think if there's one thing that we have learned, there are many things we have learned, in our session today, the whole day. But if there's one major highlight of this, it is the opportunity to be connected. So we live in an age of connectivity. Maybe we can transcend connectedness. Our parliamentarians can actually be, or lawmakers, and our activists, the community groups from each countries can learn from each other. We're only one tweet or one Facebook or one email away, and webinars have become the in thing, since it's probably one of the learnings that we gathered, from the challenges of the pandemic beginning last year, is that we learn how to navigate the global spaces, the regional spaces, through online communication. And if we continue this with this platform, we can continue to learn from each other, learn from the challenges, and then, share best practices on what we can pick up from one country or several countries and try to apply it in our own. If these would be helpful strategies in advancing protection laws, recognition laws, and anti-discrimination laws, all forms of legislation that protects everyone in promoting equality, inclusion, and acceptance in our respective countries. And so with that, it has been such an honor moderating this panel. Once more, thank you so much, Honorable Santiago.
Thank you.
Dr.
Thanks for having me, though.
Thank you. Dr. Huang, thank you so much. Honorable Kamulwang Wat, and my fellow transman, Honorable Congresswoman Geraldine Roman. Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.